Then I need to do 3 halves minus 3. So over here, if I'm going to do 3 halves minus 3, and I don't have a calculator, what I need to do is I need to write 3 as a fraction with a denominator of 2. So if I think about the number 3, I think about what divided by 2 is going to give me 3, and the answer is 6. So I can have 3 halves minus 6 halves. And remember, with fractions, we keep the denominator and we subtract the numerator. So 3 minus 6 gives me negative 3. So 3 halves minus 3 is negative 3 halves. Since the question told me to write it in slope-intercept form, and now I have the y by itself, and I have an mx plus b, that is my final answer. So y equals 3 over 2x minus 3 over 2. So take a moment to look over the your turn problem and to try it for yourself. So pause the video, work this one out, and then we'll go through it together. All right, to go over the your turn. Remember, in the previous question, we wanted to write it in slope-intercept form. So the first thing was that slope-intercept form doesn't have parentheses, so let's distribute. So negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Then we have to pay attention to signs here. We have negative 3 times negative 4. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. Then on the other side, we didn't distribute anything, so it stays y plus 6. My second step is going to be to get the y by itself like it is in slope-intercept form. So to get rid of the 6, I'm going to subtract it. And on the right side, we subtract it from 12 because neither of them have x's. They're both constants. So we have y equals negative 3x plus 6. So that's how you solve an equation from point-slope form into slope-intercept form. You can also do this with standard form. So if you need to turn standard form into slope-intercept form, you will solve for y. Our next equation is going to ask us to put something in standard form. So let's talk about standard form. So standard form is a little underrated because our numbers don't directly correspond to the graph. So in our next lesson, we'll learn about how we can graph standard form. But starting off, let's notice some key features here. So key feature is that x and y are on the same side, and c is a constant, so there's no variable with it. So any regular numbers come to one side, and x and y go to the other. So when we get to standard form, there are 3 stipulations. We have our first one, which is a, b, and c are integers. So let's recall what an integer is. If we need integers, integers are positive and negative whole numbers, no fractions. Our second stipulation is that a has to be positive, so the coefficient in front of x has to be positive. And our third stipulation is that a, b, and c have to be relatively prime. So if we want to talk about this word, we need to think about what prime is. And a number is prime if its only factors are 1 in itself. So relatively prime has to do with more than one number. So more than one number, if we have 2 numbers, or here we have 3, these numbers are relatively prime if they have no common factors. So relatively prime means no common factors other than 1. So whenever we're writing standard form, it's really important that we pay attention to these 3 rules and make sure that these 3 rules are being taken care of. So as we move to our next example, we're going to keep this in mind. And we're going to look at this. So this is another equation that's currently in point-slope form, and we want to move it to standard form. So I know I have the 3 rules. So my first rule is no fractions. So if I want to get rid of this fraction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the denominator. So the denominator on this fraction is 3. The negative can stick with the 2 up top. So if I want to get rid of all fractions, which this is our only one, what I'm going to do is I need to multiply both sides by this denominator. So I multiply this side by 3, and what that does is it's going to get rid of my denominator. Then I'm going to multiply this side by 3. So I end up with 3 times y minus 1. That one doesn't cancel out because there wasn't a fraction. And on the other side, the only thing that happened over here was that 3 and times this fraction with the denominator of 3, those things canceled out. So over here I have negative 2 times x minus 5. So step 1, if you have fractions, get rid of those fractions. Next, we're going to focus on the form. So we want standard form, which looks like this. So key feature, x and y are on the same side, and our constants are on the other. So in order to get there, notice no parentheses, so let's distribute. So on this left side, 3 times y is 3y. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And on the right side, we're going to distribute this negative 2. So negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 5 is positive 10. So my goal is going to be to get my x and my y on the same side. So what I want to do is I want to take my x and I want to move it over here. And I want to take this 3 and I want to move it over here. So the order that we do this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one we move first, but those are our two things that we need to do. Get all of our x's and y's together and all of our constants together. So let's start out with adding 3 to both sides. So take it one step at a time. By adding 3, I eliminate this negative 3. So I'm left with 3y equals negative 2x plus 13. And then that next thing I needed to do was to move this 2x to the other side. So since it's negative right now, to cancel it out, I'm going to add. Okay, so I've added 2x, and just since the x comes first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these. So I have a plus sign here. I'm going to go in and look at this 3, and this 3 is also positive, so I'm going to put a plus sign in front of it so that I can rearrange them however I want. So first I'm going to write the positive 2x. Then I'm going to write the positive 3y. And on the other side of the equal sign, all I have is the 13. So if I check my stipulations, we have no fractions, so we got to check there. Second one was a is positive. So if we look at the first number, that one's positive, so we get a check. And 3 is that they're relatively prime. So we're going to look at 2, 3, and 13 and decide if they have any common factors. So one thing that happens in this problem is that 2, 3, and 13 are all prime themselves. So if you have a prime number, it's automatically going to be relatively prime. So we get a check mark here too. So now let's move to our your turn question. So pause the video, try to work through this your turn question and see if you can get it in standard form. Okay, as we work towards getting this in standard form, let's remember the form. Ax plus by equals c. So x and y are on the same side, no parentheses. So first thing, I can think about my stipulations that I have to know. So no fractions. So far, so good. 2, we need a to be positive, and 3, we need them to be relatively prime. All right, so we don't have any fractions so far, so we don't have to worry about multiplying both sides by the same thing. We can skip right to getting rid of this parenthesis. So this parenthesis stands in the way of me getting my x and my y together. So I'm going to distribute the 7, and I get 7x plus 35. Y minus 1 stays the same. Okay, so now if I look at my plan, my game plan is going to be to move my 7x this way and to move my -1 that way, so that I can have my x and my y together and my numbers together. So remember, it doesn't matter which order we do. So say on this one, we might subtract 7x first. So I'm going to look at this y, and I know that it's positive. So if I focus on putting them in order, I'll have -7x plus y minus 1. And then on the other side, all I have is 35. So I've moved this one. Now I need to look at this one. I need to move the -1 to the other side. So I'm going to add 1. So I'll add 1 to this other side. So now I'm left with -7x plus y equals 36. So now let's check our rules for standard form. So we have no fractions, so we got to check here. And then our second one is that a is positive, so our number in front of x has to be positive. We have a problem here. So we're going to try to figure out how to change this to a positive. So our third rule is going to be to stay relatively prime, which right now we have 7, 1, and 36. So we're okay right now. We don't want to multiply by anything that'll mess that up. So I know that I need to multiply by some form of 1 to keep them relatively prime. And then to change the sign of this, I'm going to multiply by -1. So everything in this equation needs to be multiplied by -1. Whenever you multiply by -1, what it does is it just changes signs. So -1 times -7 is positive now, which is what we needed. -1 times positive y is -y. And -1 times 36 is -36. So we just have sign changes. Everything flipped signs. That way we can put a check with our a is positive. Also now we have relative prime. So by multiplying by 1, we didn't mess with their factors. So this equation from point slope form is 7x minus y equals -36. So our last thing we're going to look at are some what ifs. So we just dealt with this one. So what if we get it into standard form and our a is negative? So if our a is negative, remember we don't want to mess with the factors. We just want to deal with the negative. So if you have a negative out front, multiply everything by -1, and that'll take care of it. So -1 times -2x is positive 2x. -1 times 3y is -3y. And -1 times 7 is -7. So this equation is still the same equation, but it's now in standard form. Our next what if that we haven't looked at yet is what if a, b, and c have a common factor? So now we're failing that third test of being relatively prime. So if I look at my numbers, 4, 6, and 12, those are all even numbers, so they can all be divided by 2. So we have a common factor of 2. So to get rid of that common factor, what we're going to do is we can divide that from every number. So I'm going to divide 4 by 2, 6 by 2, and 12 by 2. So once I do that, I get 2x plus 3y equals 6. And so now notice 2 and 6 have a common factor, and 3 and 6 have a common factor, but 2, 3, and 6 together do not. So this is in standard form, this is relatively prime. So that's how we can